And some of you know our story. We'll try to keep it relatively short. But how God brings this family of Americans to Knysna, South Africa is only a story of his leading, his prompting. So Kristen will start and we'll just go kind of back and forth.
Well, I was born into a Christian family. My parents are both believers, and I grew up, my earliest memories are in church. And so I'm thankful for that heritage that I have of believing family members. And of course, I heard the gospel message from a very young age as well. And around about, I was about 8 years old when I finally realized that I needed to accept that for myself. So I was lying in bed and I was scared that I was gonna die and go to hell. And so I went out and spoke to my mother and accepted the Lord as my Savior at that time, and was baptized shortly after that by my father in a swimming pool. But I struggled as a teenager and even as an early adult. I struggled with assurance of my salvation. The atmosphere in which I grew up was very much, not necessarily in my home, but in the greater area that I grew up, was very much about what you looked like and what you did and how you acted. Much more so the outward appearance than the heart. And I think if you ask people back then, they would say, well, that's not what we meant, but that's how it came across. And so I was always worried, was I doing enough? Was I pleasing the Lord enough? Was I doing everything I had to do in order to earn salvation, really was what it boiled down to. And I just had to come to the acceptance as an adult even. I had to understand that if God said it, then it's true. And if God said he would save me when I asked, then it's so. And so really just understanding the grace of God was a huge thing for me as a young adult.
And many of you know that my mom and dad were both in Christian ministry. My mother was a school teacher, a part-time school teacher and full-time mom. My father was always a pastor from the time I was born, and we had a church and school kind of ministry connected there in Florida, so where we spent the bulk of our lives. Mom and dad were there in ministry for nearly 30 years before transitioning, but also saved as a boy, and then later had, as often in teen years, some misgivings or just insecurities. And of course, there was a bit of that, should you follow your father into becoming a full-time minister? But I knew that wasn't really what I was called to do. I love the field of music, and I love the notion of teaching, and so God has allowed us to do that. As to how we got together?
My father was a professor at a university, and so that was the university that I attended. My mother was also a teacher for quite a time. I always said I'm not going to be a teacher, and here I am. But at any rate, I attended this university, and I was in the concert band. So I played an instrument, and so was in the band. And my second year of university, you were seated according to your ability. So I just want to point out that I was the second chair is what I was. I was like number 2. And then down the row, way down the road, there was this guy that came, and he didn't stay there for long, obviously. He moved up ahead of me pretty quickly. But for a short time, I was better. And there was another friend between us, and he just picked on her all the time. He was just mouthy, he picked on her. I was like, who is this guy? He is just he's just not a nice guy. He just pick all the time. And she gave as good as she got, really. But it was just I don't even, who is this guy? That was the whole thing. Then a little bit later, the next year, I was getting ready to go on a mission trip to Antigua in the West Indies to work at a radio station there. And so at that point, we were in a brass group, a large group, and after we would practice, we would all go to lunch together. So I got to know Phil a little bit better, found out he had actually been to that same island, knew the same people we were going to work with, and so that was what brought us together, talking about me going and him having been and all that sort of thing. So that was one of the things that brought us together, and I got to know him a little bit better. And then fast forward, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, we dated quite a while. And
She broke up with me.
I did. At one point I dumped him and
gave me the boot.
I don't have time for this. I don't have time for a boyfriend. That was really it was my senior year of university. At any rate, the Lord changed my heart, and obviously here we are 27, almost 28 years later. But we got married in 1994, and then
And then I began a school career. We taught in Chicago, Illinois, just 30 minutes out of downtown at a church and school there, and we spent 3 years or so, but I wanted to continue on and teach at a different level. I was hoping to teach at the university level, and God miraculously made an opening at a very large university, the University of South Carolina, and basically then sat for my master's degree and my doctoral degree in music, largely on a full bursary, just about. My wife worked sometimes 2 and 3 jobs as we were both there to get through that experience. I tried to go into the United States Air Force as a musician officer and made it to quite a high level of audition with that organization. And God shut that door. I had asthma as a kid. And this was pre-9/11, and I would reckon that after 9/11 the rules would have changed a little bit because they were keen to have more people in the military. But at that point they were being ultra strict, and so they said if you've had asthma before, it's likely you're going to have it. It may be an issue with your military training. And so thank you, no thank you. And I was really devastated. At that point we had not had children, but really saw this as a way to serve the country or do my military service. But God had other things. I took a position in the University of Wisconsin system up in Wisconsin, USA, which is just below Canada, and it was there that the girls were born. But in those years, as you might know, teachers and schools go basically from, their school year runs from around September to June or so, and then the middle months, the June, July, and part of August, again it moves a little bit, pretty much the entire school system is off. You have holidays then. So my wife and I at that point, we both, because of a common love for the notion of serving God somewhere else and loving budget travel, we would find ourselves going to countries to meet with missionary workers, people doing things in other places. And each time asking God, is this it? Is this where you'd like for us to end up? We really feel that sort of call on your life. And so is this where you want us to go? And ultimately, in a music tour that came to South Africa in 2008, I came for the first time, met Dave Rudolph, really felt God stirring to come, and went back and told Kristen, you got to come see also. So there was a second music tour along basically from Cape Town to the Garden Route, where we would minister in churches and malls, the George Mall, York High School, Otaniqua, all these different places we were. And God was just using that to really firm up that's where we were supposed to be.
So where am I now?
Oh, sorry. Did I go past
It's okay. No, we'll just back up slightly. When we were in Wisconsin, Phil mentioned in Wisconsin we took a job, and the Lord put us right there in that spot with an amazing hospital, an amazing neonatal intensive care unit, and amazing in medical aid. So that our twins could be born there, born at 29 weeks. And so the Lord just knew that was where we were supposed to be. We had no idea why we were taking this job in the middle of nowhere where we knew no one, but that was why. And it's just so neat when we're thinking about doing something like this to look back and see how God has ordered our steps and God has provided in all the ways that we didn't know at the time, but that we needed Him to. And then to a year and 9 months after the twins were born, Erin came along, and again, just so glad that we were at that place at that time. Even though her birth was quite normal and quite ordinary, it was still where we were supposed to be at that time, and the people that were around us at that time. And then we ended up taking the group, the church that we were at, they had never done mission trips, and so we said, can we please take a group of people on a mission trip? And so we took them to Thailand, and right around that same time, we had somebody contact us about a job in Florida. We had been trying to leave Wisconsin for several years and had not been able to, and we had somebody contact us about a job. And so Phil agreed to take the job in Florida, but we had still said we would take this group to Thailand. So we took the group to Thailand, and just on the way back, or somewhere in the transition of coming back and packing up our house, Phil realized he was very ill and couldn't figure out why. It took us a long time, it took us several months to figure out the cause of it. We finally, about 4 to 5 months later, got a diagnosis of Lyme disease, which really doesn't exist in this country. It would be similar to tick bite fever, but it's a long-term thing. It's something you don't ever really get rid of. And so he struggled mightily with that. He actually was on IV for about 6 months, I believe. and he would change out his medicines and all this kind of stuff. So it was quite traumatic, I guess is the word for it. And right around this time, his colleague, who was Dave Rudolph's friend, came to him and said he was right at the end of his treatments, and he said, hey, I want to go to South Africa. And so Phil came home and, do you want to go on this team? And Phil was like, yeah, sure. And so Phil came home and said, I would like to do this. And I was like, no, bad idea. This is a really bad idea. You're very ill, and I don't think this is a good idea. Well, thankfully, the Lord knew better than I did. And so he said that would work for him to go. The Lord obviously made it all work, and Phil decided that it would be fine. And so he came on that, and then...
and that's where we really felt the sense that this is where we were finally supposed to be. Didn't know how we would do that. But in a really miraculous story that takes far longer than we have here, a 3 or 4 year bursary or grant was made available to us as a family to come and begin our lives here. Wayne and Kirsty were at Pled at that point, Dave and Julie were here, and we really felt keenly that we could come and be a part of this structure to really see the Lord grow his church along the garden route. And that was unheard of, that there would be a kind of a one-off grant for a family, professional family. And so we left our jobs. We both had good jobs. And we left all family, friend, and all that sort of thing. And 8 years ago on this past week, we've just come through our 8-year anniversary of being here. I think it was on Friday. Was it Friday? We stepped off freezing, shivering into an August or a September George airport. And our stuff was on a big steel box somewhere in the ocean between China and South Africa. And from there on, we've been here, and we thank God. We bless him for it. We praise him. It's not always been easy, as you well know. Many of you have family in other places, and you understand that difficulty. But God has said that he'll never leave us nor forsake us. And so we've called this home. We intend to be here as long as home affairs will let us, knowing that a particular august body. But it's been something that's been very, very special, and we look forward to many more years here as the Lord would guide and help us.